onto something than it is to come up with something on the fly. We've had those discussions and workshops, and now seems to be a moment that it would be useful for you to decide one way or the other. So it's really a matter for you to discuss with and persuade your colleagues as to your point of view. I would note that the setting of proposed targets is in response to the goals that you have already adopted as the foundation for the 2024-34 LTP.
So I guess to advise this discussion then on that specific goal of 30% of people using active transport and 10% of people using public transport, is anybody in the room able to potentially give us a figure on where we're at currently so we know how much of a movement that would be? To excuse the pun.
Yes, thank you for the question. I would like to backtrack. For this particular target, we have chosen a target that aligns with our regional land transport plan, our TP, and that is in fact the target. And as you can see, it is up to 2030 because that's when the transport plan period is. So we have used that, and I believe we are currently on average about 50%, which is about 20%. So I guess there is obviously room to go, and I have consulted our transport planner, and they agree with what is in the regional land transport plan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Julie. Question around which table is it that has the list of potential indicators?
Table 2.
Table 2, thank you. Just interested there, what do you mean when the top one there, when we talk about access to green spaces?
Another good question. It is a new indicator. We have not tried to present this before to the public, and it is developmental. You find that it's not in our current city dashboard. Myself and another colleague, Tiffany, are thinking of looking at an indicator where we map up where our parks and reserves are or green spaces, and we'd like to see how many population or households are within 300 meters for a start of that. And then we would like to see how many household or population estimated to have that access. And then we could then decide whether it could be 500 instead of 300 meters, but we are still developing that.
Great, thank you. Was there any, or is there consideration around potentially having an indicator that was inclusive of both public green space and private green space in terms of, you know, overall tree cover in the city or something like that?
We can definitely consider that, because one of the things that we have considered before as well, in schools these days, do we classify green spaces in schools to be public access or not? I guess at some point we would show the difference and say which ones are more relevant.
Great, thank you. And in terms of then taking Julie's previous response on board that nothing's in concrete at this stage, like kind of, can you give us a sense of kind of evolution through until say March, and then kind of, you know, what we might see then and kind of what the community would end up seeing around these?
Are you meaning for the indicator list or for targets?
I guess I was thinking more for an indicator list and kind of having a narrative around the indicator list so that, you know, somebody responding to our consultation would have a sense of what they're engaging with.
So our intention at this stage, as you would have seen in October, is to include, here are the things we're going to be looking at through the community wellbeing strategy, and so that will be included in the 10-year plan consultation materials. I mean, I guess the reason that we haven't put the indicator list up for your endorsement is that it's very much, we wouldn't want to see it as a static moment in time. This is the indicators that we started looking at when we first developed our dashboard. Sort of has changed a lot as we've developed. Well, we've had a little bit more capacity to do that, but also we've had access to different data or more data. So I guess we wouldn't see this as a list that gets adopted and then remains fixed for 3 years. We'd say this would change. And I mean, obviously one of the things that it will change in response to is requests from councillors or community feedback, but there's something we really want to find out about. We would then have to provide advice about how hard or easy that might be for us to do.
Great, thank you. I guess to come back then specifically to that green space
Sure.
line of query, do we know what we have in terms of access to data sources that would be able to inform this both from a public and private property point of view?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
could you briefly summarize what data we would be accessing or have access to at this point?
Currently, on the spot, we have maps of where the various locations of our public spaces are, and the private ones, I guess if it's a private one, it would be on a private property, but there are some in between, like I've mentioned, which are the schools. Obviously, if it's a private one, then it will not be access to green spaces. And if you wanted to be very technical, we can also look at, well, curbside, and that's a consideration because we've got trees along the road, but I personally will not be including those because, you know, it's not a reserve. And yeah.
If I can just add to that, it may be that the way we present this information for that access to green spaces actually provides 3 layers or ways of looking at it, and so you could choose as you look at it. So that's something that we'll be looking at over the next while to develop how we present that.
Thanks. I guess thinking of it kind of green spaces from kind of a sponge city lens, to use a kind of tagline, is more kind of a little bit about permeability rather than necessarily about kind of reserves and recreation. Is there thinking about kind of a permeability sponge city type of aspect to this, or would that kind of be a different indicator from what we're talking about here?
Currently, we have not considered that. I will take that into consideration. And to be frank, it is quite a new indicator. In fact, we don't even have that at the national level. So I guess we are trying to adapt some of the terminologies at the national level to see if we could present some meaningful indicators for the city. So I think among all of the indicators on that list, number 1 would be the most challenging for now, mainly because there's nothing that we can compare with that other cities have done or that we have done at the national level. But coincidentally, that seems to be, you know, arranged as number 1 because alphabetically, that's how it goes.
Great. So just to clarify then, through the chair, to understand that we don't need further direction from this meeting around kind of exploring a sponge city angle on that for the next cycle of this drafting.
Please no.
Okay, that's fine. Just
We're
want to
very
clarify.
happy to hear all your comments always about this, and really happy to receive, you know, feedback along the way to the dashboard and all the rest of it. We'll be doing what we can, and obviously the things that are coming through in the council's goal 4, that would Sponge City, whatever it's called, would be one of the things we would definitely consider.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We've got a question online. We're going to go to Councillor Zibba-Bellin. Floor's yours.
Thank you. Thanks both of us. I just wanted to pick up from Councillor Barrett there because I was thinking similar things actually, whether there was a differentiation between green space and tree cover perhaps, and mature tree cover, and what you were talking about earlier about the mapping, perhaps a mapping exercise for green space, whether or not something similar could be developed for or captured for tree cover across the city, mature tree cover, and then we could identify deficits from that Sponge City perspective, but also the cooling perspective, and it would also serve some of those other indicators like native bird counts and things like that. So I was, wondering whether or not that could, where you think that could sit and within what we've got, or whether I'm thinking perhaps something separate.
Well, thanks for the comment. We will take that into consideration. I cannot answer now. And I also like to explain that there could be many indicators that could be collated and not necessarily be included here. It could be presented at different committees as well. So it is a matter of going through where we think it sits. And I guess at some point we can also move it between committee versus the city dashboard. And I guess once we have the visibility or once we have the data, we would know better where we want to position it.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Julie, Kian. I'm warming to the indicators now. So how are we going to, I mean, being a communicator myself, how are we going to communicate this out to people? You talk about the dashboards, but are the dashboards visible now? I mean, they were a number of years ago, but are they visible now?
So the city dashboards are on our council website. We currently use a system called Invisio, and that's how they're published at the moment. We're, when I say we, I mean Kian, is doing some work at the moment to look at how we can provide that in a better way. But potentially we'll do some more in-house development of how that's presented. But it's something that we're really keen to make sure is used more and more available to the community.
Okay, and so yeah, I mean, ultimately this is our decision, isn't it? So if we suggest that, you know, there should be perhaps some other things in there, which some of my colleagues have spoken about, aspects of Sponge City, perhaps some other, but we'd probably have to evidence why we'd want them in there to get them included.
I guess through the chair, the point I was making before is that this is pretty much an operational kind of matter. We've brought the list of indicators for completeness because we're asking you for a decision about targets, because that's something that you've indicated that you wanted to talk about. We just wanted to remind you that we are looking at a whole lot more data than perhaps you may choose to reflect through a series of targets. But because it is essentially more of a day-to-day activity, we certainly don't need, you know, line-by-line resolutions on particular indicators. It's something we keep working on through the whole course of the 10-year plan.
Okay, so it's operational. Is that what I'm getting from management? Just need to understand that because it's quite critical, really.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we're saying is obviously the targets are headline targets linked to the goals in the LTP, so it's important the council approve those. What Julie and Kian are saying with the indicators is for a long period of time we've developed and adjusted indicators as and when information and resourcing becomes available. So new data becomes available, different indicators emerge. You know, we've talked a lot about stormwater and Sponge City, so the, you know, certainly the indicator list, I mean, if the council approve a set of indicators, then our ability to add another indicator requires a report to come back to adjust the indicator list. So in terms of responding, we're saying we're open to council providing feedback about additional indicators that they would like, but ultimately the targets is the key thing to approve as part of the LTP. As an example, so in terms of some of those questions earlier from Councillor Barrett, we've been exploring tree vegetation cover as part of the vegetation framework. We've been exploring assessing building footprints from aerial photography. So there's technology emerging where you can take aerial photography and look at gross floor area across the city. You know, we need to be confident that that data is robust before we then start publicly monitoring those indicators. So if we start approving by council, by resolution, a set of indicators, we lose that flexibility. So hopefully that answers the question.
Happy with that? No, not really, but that's fine. Thanks.
If through the chair, if I might
Yes.
just add, in the same way that we have lots of other reporting coming to council, for example, the quarterly economic reports, Stacey and Kian prepare those reports and then are responsive to councillor queries about particular kinds of information you'd like to see. Those reports continue to change and adapt over time. So same sort of thing, they're also indicators.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Next question, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a few questions actually, sorry. The first one is about the indicator list. So when we had the kind of interactive workshop, if I recall, that list was up and we could kind of indicate which ones we thought were more useful, I suppose. So is the potential list of targets that we've got in option, I think it's option 2, is that like the most popular indicators, or is there no relation between those two things?
Very good question. We have taken consideration all the dots that councillors have put in. We have that as a preliminary list. And we have then come back to review it. And for option 2, those were the ones that came up. So it would have captured all of the top ones that we have compiled, plus maybe 1 or 2 new ones.
Okay, thank you. And again, looking at that sort of long list of indicators, there's reference to the Living Standards Framework, the 12 domains of current well-being. Are all of those 12 domains covered in that list of indicators?
We have covered 10 out of the 12 domains.
So it seemed to me that maybe there were 1 or 2 missing. So, for instance, cultural identity, I didn't think was perhaps covered. So why have, I mean, I know we don't have to link it to the Living Standards Framework, but since we've mentioned the Living Standards Framework, why would we not include something to cover all of the domains in the Living Standards Framework?
I think one thing we need to understand is that the Living Standards Framework comes up with 11 domains with a lot of indicators. And in fact, there are indicators that are broken down into region. Sometimes it's not as easy to get indicators at the city level, which is why when we came up with the list of here about 20, we have sort of like considered, well, which ones that are readily available, which ones are maybe not so easily available. So that matched. We could only match some or come up with alternatives or substitutes for 10 out of the 12 domains.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. And again, looking at that list in table 2, there doesn't seem to be sort of equal coverage between the well-being categories. So, you know, there seem to be a whole lot of indicators for social, for example, but quite few for cultural. So do we feel that by not having an equal number of indicators for each of the well-beings, that there might be more or less emphasis placed on one over the other?
Personally, I would say no, mainly because there are some indicators that have got 3 ticks because they cross-cut against the different goals. And if you know, you've noticed that when the reason why we are having this list is because we are trying to map them to our well-being goal. So obviously these are well-being type indicators rather than operational indicators. And if you were to do a word check and map it, we mentioned, for example, active and public transport in our economic well-being. That's why it is included there. But that actually, while it cross-cuts it has got 3 ticks. It is primarily an environmental indicator, but because there are relationship we have, and therefore there could be more for others because there are some social elements and economic elements.
Okay, yeah.
If I could just add to that too, some things are harder than others. We know that there's an awful lot of economic data, for example, that comes out. We could have 10 jobs indicators if we really wanted to because of the data that's available. There might be a lag on some of that, but some of the things that are more tangible are easier to I'm trying to avoid using the word measure because I get in trouble with Kian when I do to measure. But I think some of the things are, and I think you've touched on it with your question about cultural well-being, is that they're beyond things like Te Reo Māori, which we've mentioned here, and participation in things that people want to do, like the arts and sport and so forth. It's actually really difficult to find good indicators for cultural well-being.
Okay. I guess a concern I maybe have with some of these indicators is that they broadly look across the population of Palmerston North, and they might indicate that on average housing affordability is good, but there might be a section of the population for whom housing affordability is absolutely terrible, but we wouldn't pick that up with a kind of a broad brush indicator. So is there more detail behind this so that we can be sure that we're not just looking at the average and perhaps failing to pick up that there's great disparity in some areas?
Councillor, I think that's a valid comment. The set of indicators that we have proposed here are citywide, and it is intention to be citywide because we want to tap into the long-term plan monitoring and it's over a long term. So therefore, we're looking at more the average. But that does not mean that we totally ignore more detailed indicators. And that I expect would surface in the other programs and activities that we are trying to understand, are certain activities or plans meeting those needs and addressing those issues. But those indicators would be much more specific and even more targeted for that specific reason or activity. Therefore, it is not reflected here.
I would just note, though, that these are headlines, and that even if you look at the dashboard now, obviously there's some breaking down, particularly in terms of age groups. Voting is a good example where we want to know who's voting, you know, where that data is available. It's only available nationally, I understand, not locally. So those sorts of things are being considered.
Okay, and last one, sorry, I did say I had a few questions. When we look at option 2 of the targets that are suggested in option 3, I'm wondering if there's anything that we could add in for goal 2 that would reflect cultural or creative goals that isn't the Creative Cities Index, obviously, because I don't see that in goal 2, the only thing I really see that is listed there as a target is around physical activity. And yet I feel like goal 2 has got that whole creative and exciting cultural aspect to it, but I'm not seeing that in, pardon? Yeah, if you just took the mayor's pointing out that it's in the long list, and it is, but it's not in option 2 or option 3. So is there something that we could elevate from the long list to go into 2 or 3 that you feel would fairly and accurately reflect goals around creative and exciting?
I mean, as the mayor's pointed out,
Sorry, longest question in the
there are
world.
things that keep the cultural tick in the long list of indicators. I guess our cautiousness is proposing targets where the numbers are meaningful. The participation in the arts is an obvious one, and we do have that data. That's something that we purchase additional data for Palmerston North to find out, and we've just we'll be receiving that soon. So, I mean, yeah, that's something we can develop if that's what you decided today.
If I may add,
Yes.
Julie, I was conscious about this when I was discussing it with my colleague, Gillian Tasker, and the conclusion for leaving it out was quite obvious. That there are reasons to, mainly because the reason why we want to set targets is that there's 2 we have explained. We want to know where we are in relation to national level or regional level, and as well as we want to set aspirational sort of goals to where we think we could achieve. And the conversation that we had was that at this stage, we may not be ready to commit to, my understanding of it anyway, was that we may not be committing enough to be able to set a meaningful target that we could reach. I think that was the sentiment that I picked up. And if we want to set a target, then for it to be realistic and achievable, we want to set, first of all, we can set a target for that, but then the next step is then to decide what level do we want to set it at? And that would be the next question if we were to set a target for that.
Okay, so if we wanted to include a target around creative and exciting,
Yes.
do you need an indication of that now?
No, we can't. We can accept that as a suggestion. We will go back and we will come up with some suggestions for setting the right target, because I can't come up with a target just like that.
No. So under recommendation to council, where it says that council endorse option 1 or option 2 or option 3, you know, at the moment, I would be struggling a wee bit because I don't feel that options, I mean, I don't know what people are going to put up, but options 2 and 3, for example, don't include that creative and exciting. So I'd be struggling to support them.
I guess our expectation was that should you choose to endorse one of the options that included targets, that there would well be amendments to those.
Okay, so those targets that we've got in option 2 and 3 aren't necessarily the final ones. Is that what you're saying?
That's your decision. That's the decision we're asking from you today. However, if you wanted to do option 2 plus then the way to do that would be to do another, to make another resolution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Thank you.
Sorry, just to follow on from what Kian was saying, we would be happy to come back with some advice as to what that might be with the latest data, rather than you have to pluck a number out of the air.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions. We'll keep rolling. Mr. Mayor again.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just one more, actually a couple more. Because the city's quite multicultural, and I gather that you have taken these indicators off the yellow stickies, which I didn't realise had so much importance at the time when we were doing this early work. We've got nothing there around multilingual, and I know we've got around speaking te reo, but should there not be something around the multicultural, multilingual aspect of the community, and arguably being the most multicultural regional city in the country? Or can we add that in?
I would just note that we do have on our dashboards a demographic description of the city, which does include things like we've got how many languages are spoken, for instance, because that information is gathered through the census. I'm not sure that we necessarily have information about how many people are multilingual. I'd have to think about that. But certainly one of the ways we provide sort of that fleshing out of the picture of the city is through that demographic data, which also has age ranges and ethnicities.
Yeah, I just note in the housing, it went into some detail around different ethnic groups and that, but it doesn't seem to be covered here, and just trying to tease out where we can add that, but that's fine. I'll put something up. And then we've got survival of new businesses. It's quite prescriptive. Would it not be better to have something like attraction of new businesses and retention of existing? And the reason I say that is CEDA actually, I think that's exactly what our SOI is to them. So it would be good to sort of perhaps there be some data there, or some, because I can see this is very data driven, that you might be able to grab some of that.
Yeah, we can consider that and
Yeah.
come back to you on how best to present that.
Yeah, it's a bit wider than just survival of a new business.
Yeah, yes, I mean, when I've considered that list, it's like this. It's quite easy for this list to go very long, and I guess I'm trying to be more efficient in trying to do. If some of these are more or less the same, then we can also cover some of these in, I don't know, let's say quarterly economic report or in CEDA's report, so that then the list does not quite becomes too big, and it's really more tighten it into well-being aspects. But yeah.
I'd just add too that survival of new businesses, one of the useful things about that indicator is that you can compare it across the country, and so that I think it's businesses still operating after 3 years is the indicator, but we can certainly look at different ways of talking about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Before we go on, can I just understand the time pressures we're under to approve this? Is this to be included in the draft plan? Is that the intention, or can I understand the context and time frame?
Yeah. Oh, David's got his hand up.
Yeah, you just go to you.
I mean, through you, Mr. Chair, I think in response to that question, it also relates to the line of questioning from Councillor Johnson about some, an option 2+ that deals with goal 2, creative and exciting. I just remind elected members of the recommendation. So the recommendation is to endorse option 1, 2, or 3 to inform the preparation of the LTP. So really what we're seeing here is a harder signal around the targets that will then come back as part of the LTP for formal approval. So we've had workshop discussions about this, but they were sort of somewhat circular, and we don't take directions from workshops. So this is a signal in terms of the preparation of the LTP. So for instance, if you went with option 2 plus, explore something for creative and exciting goal 2, then would do that and come back as part of the LTP for formal approval. So it's endorsed to inform the LTP.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. We'll carry on with questions. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Just looking at the indicators under table 2, with the trust and council indicator, wouldn't that be under all 4: economic, cultural, social, and environmental? Wouldn't it be a tick under all 4?
I guess we've probably included it where it is because goal 3 tends to talk about engagement with the community, but sure, I mean, this is just an indication of the coverage. It's not a science.
Yeah.
I think it might be a comment rather than a question, but
No, it wasn't.
yeah.
It was definitely a question.
Okay.
It's definitely not a comment.
Okay, so in terms strategically speaking, then
Just
we
giving you my question.
strategically speaking, we've situated things like trust and institutions and the relationship between the community and the council in goal 3. That's why it's where it is.
Okay. And with voter turnout, again, it's only under one category. Why is that only under one category and not under others? Because it could go under all 4 as well.
It certainly could, and the reason is the same.
Okay. So was this an opinion that it goes under one category rather than all 4?
It's an informed assessment of the strategic direction and the alignment with the indicators.
Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry to jump back in. I guess the conversation changes depending on what option you're considering moving. So I was wondering, although it's been unorthodox, if you are looking at moving option 2 and councillors did want to do a 2+, if we could take a 2-minute break so that we can put our heads together rather than having 4 different amendments for a 2+, we could perhaps have one catch-all that had a creative and multicultural, and rather than going through and doing 7 different amendments.
That's a question to me as chair. I'm happy to have a break. I'm guessing my read of the room is that we're unsure necessarily if this is the right line of sight we're heading, and to be leaning to 1, 2, or 3 option is still at a little bit of a loss to me. I come in thinking we'd just keep it simple with option 1 and develop them afterwards, but I'm getting a range of views, and so it's not clear to me. And I'm happy to have a break to go into informal, but or park it. But it just when next. But that's my response as chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Lead on with your following question.
Well, that really was my question. If you're looking at 2, then we need that. If you're looking at option 1, then I guess we'd leave it as is. So
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chair, I'm quite happy to move option 1 and just get it on the table. And I can sense from my colleagues' questions that that's probably the most logical to get us on the journey.
Yeah, there's no further questions, just so we're clear. Okay, we do have a question online. I was indicated with that. So let's come back to that. I'll take that. We have got one question online. Apologies, this is not queued. Councillor Zell-Bellin, back to you.
Oh, my apologies. I did not know that my hand was raised. I was not in the queue, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's helpful, actually. There's no, there's no further questions. Thank you, Kian and Julie. Appreciate that. Okay, before we move on, David, our Chief Planning Officer.
Sorry to keep jumping in from the stance. Through you, Mr. Chair, just want to clarify that option 1 is proceeding with the indicator list at the end and no targets. So there's
That's understood.
Okay.
Yep, we're clear. And that's been moved to advance debate and discussion on this by the Mayor and seconded by Councillor Hapeta. Open it up. Mr. Mayor, did you want to lead out being the mover? That work? Not this time, this time. How about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'd have to say I don't feel like we're owning this, although we're taking officer advice, and we do that in goodwill. Just in the last discussion, we didn't take the officer advice. I don't feel comfortable that we're owning this, so I'm not sure what to do. Actually, I was just getting the from Mr. Murphy that conversation that if we go with option 1, we don't have targets. Is that not our decision? it is our decision that we do that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's entirely your decision. And if you want targets, we've suggested 4 targets or 7 targets or a combination of any other targets. So this is completely council's decision. And without any direction, then officers will be preparing the LTP with a set of targets that officers think is. So there isn't a recommendation explicitly because this is a council decision.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, in that case, maybe I do withdraw option 1, and Mr. Chair, perhaps we do have a break and have a bit of an understanding what we're doing. I'll signal here that I'm not comfortable with I'm comfortable with some of them, but I just feel like we're making it up on the go a little bit.
Okay, maybe I'll help
yeah,
you
thank
if you've finished that has been tabled and second, but I'll move the procedural motion that this report be referred to the next council meeting and look for a seconder. Councillor Johnson. And the reason I'm going to put this procedural motion is because I feel like reading the room, there's an agreement. I don't think we're owning this. There's a mixture whether we should have goals and whether these are the right goals. And should we keep it simple and just move recommended option 1? I think giving some space will actually be able to have some informal conversations around what we should be heading with and come a lot more clearer and be using our time much more effectively. That's all I wish to say. I'll put the procedural motion to a vote when the administrators are ready. Yeah, the report be laid on the table and referred to the council meeting on the 6th of December. No, I think that's it. Just invite a vote. Okay, we're going to invite the vote. That's passed unanimously, 13 votes for, none against. That concludes that item. Thank you. That moves us to item 13, which is the procurement policy, and invite Paul Hollis, our procurement manager, to present this report. When we come to moving recommendations, there will be an additional recommendation to rescind the previous motion as part of taking this together to adopt this new policy, just for information at this stage. The floor is yours. Thank you, Paul. It'll come up as the previous decision.
Right. Good afternoon. So I'm bringing you today a principle-based procurement policy, the content of which has been, I suppose, inspired by discussions through workshops, best practice within local government, and I suppose the 4 well-beings of local government. Now, the desire for a procurement policy was triggered by a request by council to have a procurement policy that targeted kind of sustainable and environmental outcomes. The scope has been broadened, and that was based on a business assurance review that suggested we had one procurement policy that amalgamated all of council's procurement expectations. So, as is best practice, the intent will be to, I suppose, apply these procurement principles captured within the policy on an outcome kind of based focus. and obviously alongside our standard requirements in regards to quality, price, and time. Should note that the policy has a mechanism for the monitoring and reporting of the procurement outcomes associated to the principles. But yeah, other than that, I'll take it as read and take questions for you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Paul, for the work on this at workshop and bringing it here as a report. Was interested in the social equity principle and that there was a singular measurement there around living wage employers, and just wondered, were there any other measures considered around social equity and why they were or weren't included?
I suppose when kind of drafting the metrics, we had to be pretty mindful of what was realistic, what we could capture, and I felt that that was one that we could measure. It was a commitment of council. But yeah, happy to hear any other metrics that you may have in mind.
Thanks. I guess are there other social equity and social responsibility type indicators that are available to organizations and businesses?
Well, none come to my mind.
Right. And you have looked into it?
Yes.
Thank you. Just also had some questions around the kind of approach that we're taking on some of these different principles. So in the workshop, we had kind of the actions associated with the principles were to consider asking certain questions of suppliers. And now that it's come through in council papers, in some cases we're seeing that we will include questions, and in other cases it's saying we'll just consider including questions. I just wondered kind of what the rationale was there around making those changes between workshop and here.
Sorry, I suppose just trying to understand your question, but from discussions, my understanding was that, we would always apply these principles and hence the questions related to them. But obviously it would be on a case by case basis where appropriate, which.
Thanks. So, for instance, on upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi, in the actions around how we can achieve this, it says we'll include the following supplier focused questions with every procurement. Whereas if we look in, let's say, social equity, the action there is that we will consider including the following questions. And so I'm wondering, one is quite deliberate and directive, we will, and the other one is consider. And I'm wondering why that difference.
To be honest, I think that it's probably just an oversight, simply for the fact that I think it would be difficult for us to state that we will measure them in every single procurement, and that we should, the question, I suppose the way it should be written is that we will consider it for every procurement.
So that's not what you've proposed on the paper. So just flag that there's an inconsistency then between your advice verbally in the chamber and what's actually on our papers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hapata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the paper. Just looking at fostering local business, and it talks about that we are looking to make a positive economic contribution to our city, but given the size and needs, and I won't read the whole sentence out, but basically I get the gist of the sentence is that we are trying to support local and basically give our contracts to local. How much do you think that we will be able to do that going forward?
Suppose I'm reluctant to tell you because I'm actually not off the top of my head. fully aware of what our current spend is for local businesses. I am aware it is pretty high, but yeah, so without knowing exactly what the percentage is now, I couldn't gauge how much more it's going to increase by.
So you don't know what the current spend is locally, but
Sorry, a percentage of our current spend. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. When I last checked, which yet again was probably a couple of years ago, it was about 40%.
So this does this sort of say that we'd be going 100%, or is that what this principle is talking about?
Yeah, again, I think all of the principles speak to, I suppose, aspirations. We're not making a commitment to put all our spend locally. I think hopefully it's clear that that's not possible. We need, contractors, for instance, to have capacity, and they're not all going to be locally based.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll call on our Chief Financial Officer, Cameron Mackay, to make additional comment.
Yeah, just a couple of comments from me. I think it's important to note that not every procurement we do is, we have a range of different types of goods and services that we procure. And so when we go out to market for a good or service, we are going to get a range of responses that aren't always going to be the same as the last thing we went out to procure. So taking, for example, the fostering local business, we have an intent that we most definitely want to foster local business, but there will be some procurements we do where it may not actually be a local person who can or is willing to do the work that we are required. So I don't think we'd ever get to 100%, but I think if everything else is equal in terms of the other, I guess, attributes of the procurement, and dollar amount and everything came out equal, and the one principle that was left was, is it a local person or not a local person? This would give some weight and reasoning towards supporting local.
Yep, Councillor Hapeta.
So does the price go ahead of local, or does local go ahead of price?
I guess that's going to depend on the type of procurement. There will be some things where price is a more important factor of the procurement. There'll be others where actually the other factors of procurement are more important than price. So there isn't a one stock answer. Unfortunately, it will depend on the type of procurement being undertaken at the time.
Thank you. Thanks,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That exhausts questions. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate you presenting this report. I'll move both recommendations before us and seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments or debate. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's really good to have these set of principles. I think to give guidance to the officers when making these purchasing decisions, I think it's really good to have clear principles for procurement decisions. I think they are very hard to stick to, but it is good for an organisation to have really good guidelines and principles. But I think at the end of the day, it will be very hard to stick to them and be very pure to these principles. But at the end of the day, it's very good to have them. So well done to the officer for making these guidelines and putting them in place. So thank you for that work.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I too, like Councillor Hapeta, it's great to have this. It's been a long time coming because we used to have I think a management policy, but sitting in this chair, there was quite a few holes in it, and it's great to see that there is a policy now which does give our locals an opportunity. And I look, as Councillor Hapeta, it's sometimes subjective on how the weighting is placed on many of these principles, but they certainly are. Look, we've got it now, and I think, last night a few councillors and myself went to a business event where the business community pretty well said to us that they felt they needed to communicate better with council. So this is one way which we can go to our wider business community and say, look, this is what we're doing in our local community. Please get involved. So thanks to Paul and the team. Well done, and I hope you support it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Then we'll go to Councillor Zebulon online.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to indicate, I do have a clarifying recommendation, which I've only just sent through an email to yourself and administrators, based on the officer's response around. It sounded that there had been some drafting, unintended drafting errors in the transition from workshop to here that saw the considering going to a more definitive including. And I think what I heard in response to answers was that we needed a more flexible approach in the policy in terms of including the appropriate questions for the appropriate procurement scenario rather than a fixed. So the additional recommendation is for both the fostering local business and the upholding Te Tiriti principles of the procurement policy that we replace the word include with the words consider including, which is consistent with what we saw at workshop and consistent with the advice heard. So would just introduce that and ask for that to be supported as well.
Thank you, Councillor, and Councillor Johnson seconded that. So that's on the table. Councillor Zebulon, floor's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to tautoko Councillor Barrett's comments there. I think that consistency across all of the principles is really important. So I'd just like to see that brought in line. And I also just in the name of consistency, I wanted to comment and that I noticed some of the feedback that we're given in the workshop regarding the titles of these and having consistent verb directives across all of them has been noted, and I was really pleased with the choices that you've made. I think advancing social equity and enhanced environmental outcomes is bang on the money. Well done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I'll now invite a vote on all three recommendations. Okay, that's passed unanimously, 13 votes for and none against. That moves us to item 14 and invite Bryce Hoskins, our Group Manager for Property and Resource Recovery, forward to present the OP Place Reserve paper.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair and councillors. Just before I kick into it, in the past we've sometimes taken these in sort of groups, if you will. There could be an opportunity if you would like to take item this one, 14, 15 and 16 together potentially. Because they're all the same step in the process.
What I'll do, because we've had some conflicts of interest declared, we'll cover 14 and 15 together before we start moving into the conflict zone. So if that's right, so we can do
absolutely
both the 14, which is OP Place, and the 15, which is 21 Havelock Avenue papers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So essentially, these are both step one in the leasing process. So by approving these resolutions today, you're not committing to a lease. We're simply going out for consultation as per the requirements of both our internal policy and the Reserves Act of our intention to go on a lease. So happy to answer any questions.
Right, thank you. Open the floor, if there are any. Two very straightforward papers, Bryce, thank you. No questions. So I'll move recommendations that are on our item 14 and item 15, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments or debate. There being none, I'll now invite a vote on both 14 and 15. That's passed unanimously, 13 votes for, none against. Bryce, can I invite you back to present item 16, which is the 154 Centenary Drive proposal. And councillors will note that there's a part 2 item, which is for information only associated with this item. Thank you, Bryce. Floor is yours.
Yes, again, this is step 1 in the process, seeking to for public consultation. So happy to take any questions on this one too.
Okay, I'll open the floor. Thank you, Bryce. There's no questions. I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Any comment or debate relating to it? There being none, I'd now like to invite a vote. That's passed 12 votes for unanimously. Thank you, Bryce. Can I invite you back to present item 17? This will get your steps up. This is the 119 Highbury Avenue proposal. Bryce.
Thank you. Yes, not going far. So this is conversely the last step in the process. So we've been out for consultation on the premises that's currently occupied by Highbury Weavers and has been for some time. So this is actually, by approving this, you are actually looking to grant a lease. Again, happy to take any questions.
Great. Open the floor for any questions. There being none. Thank you, Bryce. Again, I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open up for any comments or debate. There being none, can I invite a vote? That is passed unanimously, 12 votes for. Bryce, can I suggest that we take items 18, 19 and 20 as the balance of that section, and then we'll do 21 as a separate item. Yeah, we realise that, but he's presenting those reports and we'll move accordingly. Yep. Floor is yours, Bryce.
Thank you again. Yes, probably of note where this deviates from the normal is what was rightfully discussed around item 18. In the last paper, when we sought approval to go out for consultation, there was an additional recommendation passed looking at the term specifically. In consultation and actually speaking to the bowling club themselves, that they have highlighted the amount of investment they're doing into their facility. They were quite confident in their member numbers, and they were even noting that they were experiencing a bit of a uptick in attendance, which was fantastic. And as such, they were asking for the exact term to be clarified in terms of this process and that what we enter into. Importantly, recommendation 2, either option you choose is actually in line with the previous recommendation. And this decision typically would actually sit within my delegation as manager of the property department, but given the discussion was on this specifically last time, I wanted to bring a recommendation and let councillors decide. Happy to take any questions.
Open it up for any questions. Councillor Wood.
Sorry, just a quick one. I see that the lease we just approved on item 17 had a 5-year lease by default. I was just wondering why this didn't have a 5-year lease by default anyway.
So that was what was proposed last time, was a 5+5, which would be standard, and it was that additional recommendation that suggested we should consider that differently.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just to be really clear, the bowling club themselves would like a 5+5 lease.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions. Thank you, Bryce. I'm happy to move the recommendations, particularly with Item 18 being the 2A, which is the 5 years right of renewal with a further 5 years, and look for a seconder, which is Councillor Naylor. And item 19 as noted, and 20 as noted. Open it up for any comments or debate. There being none, I'd like to invite a vote on 18, 19 and 20. It's passed unanimously, 13 votes for. Bryce, invite you to present item 21, which is the Pioneer Highway grant and easement to Powerco Limited.
Yes, thank you. Yep, slightly different being an easement and for a utility provider, although the process is the same. To remind councillors, this was a situation where the actual physical location of the transformer was slightly off from where was agreed and actually found its way onto a reserve rather than being on road reserve. So we're just looking to do an easement to tidy that up from a title perspective. However, it doesn't have any kind of material effect on the operation at all of the park. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Bryce. With 1.1, where Powerco became recently aware that they had placed a new ground-mounted transformer inside the boundary of the Pioneer Reserve, does that happen often?
No, not so much anymore. It is something that was relatively frequent, especially back in the sort of the 80s in particular. There seem to be a lot of these, many of which in previous years we've actually looked to slowly but surely tidy up. So much so that Powerco several years ago actually employed someone specifically on their staff to go through all around the country sorting all of these kind of issues. However, this one is probably the first of these situations in some time.
Kaupo, my second question is, so you're satisfied it was a genuine mistake and not likely to occur again?
Absolutely. It was sort of essentially a couple of meters off where we'd sort of agreed, and that was the difference between it being on a reserve or the road.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Simple question. Changing your title is a reasonably expensive business. Are they paying for it or are we paying for it?
No, they are taking all costs.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Just wondered where it is.
Yeah, there's usually a map. But
Yeah, there's usually a map. Yeah. Or an address.
Apologies, that was in the previous report and didn't find its way through. It's Pioneer Highway and Pioneer Reserve. So the essentially where that shared pathway is, and that's actually a reserve in there as well. And that's the land that it's on, a portion of that.
It's quite long. Like
yeah.
Like
Okay.
where is it?
Exact location. Closer to the Manawatu Harness Club than the other end.
Okay.
Sorry, difficult to give you the exact location, but in the previous paper it did have a physical map that showed you exactly where.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. There's no further questions. I'm happy to move both recommendations in this report, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comment or debate. There being none, I'd like to invite the vote. That is passed unanimously, 13 votes for and none against. Just reminding councillors, item 22 has been referred to council at the beginning of this meeting, which leaves us with our committee work schedule. I'm aware there's nothing to add from our Chief Financial Officer, but he's happy to respond to questions if there are any on this paper. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. See, rates review has been put off again and not coming until February. Is that not going to be too late for the long-term plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as signalled at the previous workshop, there is going to be another workshop on rates review next week, just to I guess go through a little bit more detail on things, and that will enable us to bring back a report in February for long-term plan.
Before the long-term plan.
For the long-term plan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Good question. There's no further questions. I'd like to move that we received the work schedule dated November 23, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comment or debate. There being none, I'd now like to invite a vote. That is passed unanimously, 13 votes for. Thank you, members. Thank you, staff. Can I call on the Deputy Mayor to close us with karakia?
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, and tēnā tātou, to our staff, the officers, and to all of us here, ngā mihi nui ki a tātou. Whakarongo ake au ki te tangi a te manu a te mā tui. Tui, 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 tui a. Tui a I runga, tui a I raro, tui a I roto, tui a I waho, tui a ki te here tangata. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna.
Tīna.
Haumi e, hui e, tai ki. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you.